Glad he's wearing
Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers, on the air since 2014 as Santa Barbara's most popular, awarded, and only local news analysis and commentary show. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, March 10, 2023, and I am very pleased to welcome our all-star panel of top local journalists: Janene Scully, North County Bureau Chief for Newshawk; Gwyn Lurie, Editor-in-Chief of the Montecito Journal; Ryan P. Cruz, staff reporter for The Independent; and Josh Molina, Santa Barbara's answer to Joe Rogan, international man of mystery and Newshawk sex therapy correspondent. Thank you all for coming. Okay.
That's why I'm late, Jerry.
Okay. We don't really want to hear about it, Josh.
Okay, overshare. All right, news this week, more than usual, dominated by housing. I want to go around the horn and talk about some of the many housing stories breaking out this week. Janene, we're down here talking about, ABRs and ARBs and, 3 units here, 2 units there. And you've had a story out of the County Planning Commission about a 4,000 unit project, Solomon Hills project. And I was a little confused. It seemed like the staff wanted them the commission to turn it down, but they accepted it. What's the status of that, and what does the project look like?
So it's basically a whole new community south of Orchid, Solomon Hills. It's an area that's was used for oil fields for 100+ years. It's 4,000 housing units of all type, from executive mansions to affordable housing, allegedly. Businesses, offices, fire station, school. So basically it's a brand new city or community. This is very early in the process. Basically, the Planning Commission took a first review on whether to even accept the application. Staff only recommended rejection or denial so that it would forward it to the Board of Supervisors and they also could take an early look. But the planning commissioners balked at the idea of needing the Board of Supervisors, and that their role is to basically be that filter for the Board of Supervisors. So they accepted it. It can be appealed, and which would send it to the Board of Supervisors. And again, this is super early. They still would need to do a specific plan. They need to do environmental impact report, which would be several meetings. So it's quite a ways from happening. They said it was like a long-term plan, possibly over 25 years. So it's also not a city that's going to pop up tomorrow to solve.
So it really wouldn't do anything for the county's housing element problem. In other words, you couldn't say, hey, we're building 4,000 units here, don't worry about a thing, to the state. Correct?
Not correct. I don't see it affecting in the current housing cycle that they're planning for.
Yeah, so. And you wrote that the developer is a private equity firm called Solstra. Who are they? Are they local, or do we know anything about them?
They're out of Denmark. They have offices in Denmark and London. They have a local office. They have local representatives that are on their team, including Jay Higgins, some of the other names. They are not local. They say that they've done similar kind of communities in Europe. It's basically touted as a carbon-free community. They're going to plan on solar panels from the outset, no gas appliances. So it's also targeted as a 15-minute city where everything is close by, so you don't have to necessarily leave.
Mm-hmm.
So all I know about them is that they're out of Europe. Yeah. And
yeah, I was interested to see Jay Higgins' name pop up there. Is he still on the city planning commission? Is he not? Josh, no, he's off.
No, he's termed out, but it does sound like a better site than the Glen Annie Golf Club. I will say that.
Yeah.
Jerry,
Okay.
don't you think it's interesting that all over Santa Barbara County there seems to be a question about the role of planning commissions?
Yes. What elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, this planning commission is saying they're supposed to interpret, it shouldn't have to go to the supervisors to approve. They should be able to interpret what's acceptable use. And I mean, it just even in Montecito with our recent, Susan Keller being asked to leave and her interpretation, sort of what her role and responsibility on the board is, as opposed to others feeling what is appropriate activity for the.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think, it's because the Board of Supervisors are trying to shove this stuff down everybody's throat. Cannabis, which is what happened. And you saw how many times the county planning commission got overturned by the board on cannabis.
Right. They want their thumb on every scale.
Exactly. And now with housing, the same thing. Gwyn, let me ask you about housing in Montecito, because a couple of the city council people in Goleta have been very upset with Montecito because there are no units currently in the housing element in Montecito per se. Is that a bad rap, or are there good reasons for it, or what's your take on that?
I mean, yes and no. I think it's true. I mean, I think people in Montecito are very concerned and actively engaged in the issue of housing and the houseless and issue. But, I don't personally know of land that could currently be used to build low-income housing. That said, I mean, SB 9 and SB 10, there's been a lot of pushback from here on that, which would allow for property division and the building of, more homes. But many people argue that, first of all, people aren't going to build low housing projects on their property. They're going to build other expensive homes that are going to sell for a fortune. And the other piece of it is the fire hazard aspect, which is, I do think, a very legitimate conversation and really does need to be solved. And in my understanding of it from conversations with the fire chief is that as it is, we don't have the capacity to evacuate safely in a moment's notice every citizen that lives here. So given all of the, wildland urban interface issues that we've had, the debris flow, the floods, all of that, I think it is something that needs to be looked at. Like, how legitimate is that a reason to not say we should up the population of Montecito?
Yeah, Josh. So James Carriaco of the Goleta City Council, and a fan of the show, we should mention. Shout out, James. But this rather sternly worded letter that he wrote about the housing, or he and Luz wrote about the housing element, and the lack of any units in Montecito or Hope Ranch. Was that just a cheap shot? Or is there something to be said substantively for that argument?
Well, it's conversations with people who've been around a long time. So James is essentially calling Doss on his BS. Okay. Doss has been around forever. James has been around forever. And the letter basically says, for somebody who wants to put everything in moral terms, who wants to talk about, we don't want to lose another generation of housing, how we need to build for people who have, so they can live near their jobs, and we need to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And it's always this like incredible moral imperative, okay, from him. James is basically saying, stop saying that. Stop talking like that. Like, we're over it. I've heard you say it a million times. It doesn't make sense. So what he's saying is, fine, if you don't want to focus on housing in Montecito in your district, stop talking like that and just be honest about it. Just say, for like some of the reasons Gwyn just outlined, that there's some real practical challenges there. So James is basically saying, look, you can't with a straight face say we're going to build 1,500 units here, 800 units here on the edges of Goleta, and then say it's a moral imperative that we need to build housing. Because if it's a moral imperative to build housing, then you need to find a way to build it everywhere, or at least look at opportunities. And so that's what he is saying. And of course, James has he represents Goleta. He has higher aspirations, of course he does. He's a young guy and he's been around. He's going to want to do stuff. So, I think we've got some politicians who are kind of calling each other. I think it's interesting that Luis Reyes Martin co-signed the letter because, they're all tied together in the Democratic Party, right? They're all close allies when it comes election time. So I kind of think it's interesting to watch a little bit of this back and forth over housing to see how it's going to play out. Now DOS has this Miramar site. What is it going to be? 10 units, maybe? Who knows?
Let me
but at least
just bring
it's something.
Let Ryan in for a second because I want to finish the go around. I mean, because there's a big project in Carp now that's also very controversial that you wrote about. What, 173 units or something, and people there are not happy about that.
Yeah, that one is right outside Carpinteria. It's technically on county land. It's owned by the school district right now. They had set it aside for a 350 person school. That enrollment was down, so they kind of abandoned that project, and that made this a surplus land. And this company, Redtail, came in, and they're doing a deal, and they're trying to do 173 units there, and 132 would be moderate income affordable, and then 41 would be a whole different thing that would be run through the county housing authority. So in the beginning, it seemed like the county and the city were kind of working together, and then when Redtail kind of got involved, the city really saw that they were on the outside on this, even though it's going to be using Carpinteria city water. It's right on the outside of the city, so it's going to affect the city. And they're kind of pushing back, and they're saying that the housing authority should drop that project altogether. So it's going to get interesting. It's really early. It was a concept review. That means there was nothing official. No application's been filed yet. But another wrinkle to this is this might be one of the first builder's remedy project that we see. They've submitted
Explain what that is.
That means that the county would have no objective standards, or they would be able. It's basically a quick pass through the review process for this project, which would make it very interesting. They're not asking for too many right now. They're not asking to go really big or make it way bigger than it's supposed to be, or according to county standards now. But we don't know if that's going to change after the application comes.
Once again, the embattled citizens of Carp taking in the shorts. Gwyn, what was
I was just going to go back to something Josh was talking about with the James and DOS back and forth. The fact of the matter is, even if DOS wanted to put lots of affordable housing in Montecito, he has the community to deal with too. And I don't think Montecito overwhelmingly elected DOS to supervisor, this portion of his district. So I'm not saying he doesn't have his supporters here. He certainly does. But I just think this is just my human hat on, not my reporter's hat on. But I think across the board, we all need to have conversations about our liberties versus people's rights for things like housing and other things. At what point are we willing to give up a little bit of our creature comforts, a little bit of our right to do whatever we want, and to live the way we've always lived, and do acknowledge that we're all better off when we're all better off. So I don't know that everyone agrees with me in this community, but I do think that's an important, from a PR perspective and a community conversation perspective.
Josh, it sounds to me like Gwyn agrees with your analysis that that DOS's overweening arrogance and air of fake moral superiority is really getting to people. Hey, listen, on another story you had this week, the ongoing saga of what's going to happen at Cumbre Plaza. It sounds like that is maybe shaping up as a test case, right? The developer wants the 60-foot height limit. The council says no way, no how. Is that going to court, or what do you think?
Well, the city council met Tuesday in a closed session. It was an earlier time, and it was to talk about potential significant exposure to litigation regarding height limits. So obviously that's related to this project. And so the developer, Matthew and Jim Taylor, father and son team, they want to build 685 units. They own about half of the property at Cumbre Plaza. And so they have big plans. It wants to be 88 feet tall. Okay. And it's going to be multi-leveled, multi-storied, and there's going to be open space and services and a little bit of commercial and a whole bunch of great stuff that's going to happen there. But it's 88 feet tall. Okay. And they submitted it under SB 330, which limits the number of discretionary reviews that cities can have on a project. And as long as they meet the zoning, the current zoning, it's a ministerial approval. It's a checklist because Governor Gavin Newsom says, just build the housing, just build it, right? We're going to take away your local control because communities haven't built it. And the city's over here saying, we want a specific plan, right? We talked about this. We want to work together with you, the other family that owns the other half of the Cumbre Plaza. Let's do this together. And Matthew and Jim Taylor are saying, no, that's going to take forever. So the city, what they did was they reviewed their pre-application and they said it's too tall. It needs environmental review. They basically just sort of dismissed SB 330 and reviewed it from their lens.
Because it's in the charter.
Yeah, and there's a number of traffic circulation improvements that need to be done. So all that can probably be worked out except for the height. And so at some point, Matthew and Jim Taylor are going to have to figure out if they're going to play ball here and reduce the height and work with the city for an easier process. But they need that many units in order to make it pencil out in terms of them having some profit here. Obviously, these people are financially wealthy, but if you talk to developers, they had to make a huge investment to buy this property. They don't become rich overnight. It's like a decade long before. And so like 10, 15 units, according to them, it's a huge difference in why they would make this investment. So they're going to have to decide what they're going to do. Obviously, the council would love a specific plan there. So I think that maybe the threat of some kind of litigation may make both parties here try to work together.
All right, I want to get on to some other stuff, but just two notes statewide, because the city of Highland Park in Orange County did in fact sue the state this week over all this, and the state sued them, and so Randy Rouse, if you're listening, jump in on that as a lawsuit to push back on this pencilhead Scott Wiener, who's driving this whole thing. And then the other thing to watch, there's a bill by Assemblyperson Buffy Wicks, you heard it here first, which would change the way that commercial property is able to include residential property. It's kind of a big deal, I think, coming down, and it would offer more incentives to commercial property owners to build housing. So that may be something which maybe eases up some of the conflicts here. Gwyn, did you want to point going out of the housing discussion?
No, I was writing this down because I want to read about that. That sounds interesting.
All right.
I would point out before one thing, I would point out that
Yeah.
this week the Santa Maria City Council approved converting
yeah.
the Irvin's property, which is Town Center West, into 104 apartment units. It's the first phase of several apartment projects, residential projects proposed for downtown Santa Maria. But they basically are, the Vernon Group in Santa Barbara has proposed basically gutting the Mervin's building, creating a courtyard facility, and it's kind of a cool, the photos, artistic renderings are pretty cool on how they plan to make this happen. There are no height discussions for us, of course. We love housing in North County.
All right. Are there affordable units in that project?
No, not that one, which was a discussion, but there are currently under construction. There's an affordable, I want to say 100, maybe 140 units. There's a affordable workforce housing apartment project in Santa Maria. And there's an affordable senior housing project in Santa Maria.
So in other words, you're saying, Janene, if the South Coast just delays and obstructs long enough, it's all going to be built in Santa Maria anyway.
That's the way it's looking.
That's the way it's.
Yeah, I think the short-term answer is, I think it's obvious that it's reuse right, of building space that we have. And I'm going to I'm going to sit down hopefully next week with Tess Harris and Ken Saxon to find out what's going on downtown.
Yeah, good. All right. We'll wait to hear about that. All right, Janene, two other really interesting stories that you've had recently. One is this whole, and they're both involving the culture wars come to the valley there. A blow up at the Solvang City Council, I guess, about whether to display pride flags during the month of June and also to paint the flag in the crosswalks, which confuses the horses or something, which probably is true. And then at the Ballard School District, this dispute over some poor little kid wanting to say his pronouns or something. Can you run those two stories down for us and for those who haven't seen them?
Yeah, so the first one was whether the city council would allow Solvang Pride or San Ynez Valley Pride to put up banners for Pride Month, just rainbow saying something like we support, just fairly low key. The reason they have to go to this city council is it's on city light poles, and the city says that they've never allowed that for other political organizations or religious organizations. They have done it for Yule Fest and other community organizations, however. And then the other was creative crosswalks, which Lompoc has. They're kind of a cool little feature to liven your downtown. But Solvang wanted to, or the Pride application suggested rainbows. And there were questions on whether that would interfere with the horses, who apparently can't really distinguish whether this would be 2-dimension or 3-dimension. So anyways, so that's why
down to the horses, doesn't it? Yeah.
I know and they have the horse-drawn trolley, and then they also have obviously a number of horses in the parade. And then the Ballard School situation was not so much about the topic, although I think on some factions it was the topic, but it was because it was a school board member who is a parent of the child and went into the classroom to support their kid, to announce the new name and the new pronouns. And there were some questions from parents on why didn't we know this was going to occur. I'm not sure they would have had the same reaction if it was a different kind of announcement. So there were questions on basically why we weren't notified that this conversation was taking place. And there was some theory that the school board member basically overstepped his bounds by participating. The whole thing, according to the family, took less than 5 minutes, was just brief. It was not a coming out party as some people described it. So that's the other secondary.
I found that story so sad. This poor little kid. I mean, it's just kind of we're caught in the middle of it, and then all these adults start, throwing stuff.
Jerry, I think the whole thing is so sad. I mean, it's just so sad. I mean, there were Christmas decorations on every lamppost in Solvang over Christmas. Those are religious. No one stops the churches and Christian organizations from putting them up. It's just an excuse. And it's, they talk about they want to stay away from woke. And it's like, it's not woke. There are citizens who live there. That the whole idea of inclusion is feeling comfortable where you live, is feeling like you're a part of it, that you're accepted, that your culture, that your belief system, that it's all okay. And to me, it's just, I think you put it exactly right when you said it's sad.
Yeah.
I just like to point out, Jerry, that, it's a Danish town, right? But Danish are famously one of the most open people, and having a Pride Week would be something that the Danish people would welcome and love. And it just seems that it is disappointing that you see this still so strong in the community, and that this demographic is still out here and saying that it's hurtful, or it's really just being inclusive and letting people be themselves. And if your kid can't even express who they are, that's really disappointing when they're in their school trying to be comfortable around their friends, and somebody who doesn't even go to school wouldn't even know about that school unless they heard about this story. Then they take to social media and say, this is this and this is that. Let the kids be who they are these days. If it's not who they were when you were growing up because they couldn't be like that, that's a different thing. But you gotta you got to.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point, Ryan, about Denmark being way out front on gay marriage. But what about the Vikings? What do you I don't know, where do they come in?
Not so much.
Not so much the Vikings. Okay. And does anybody, whatever happened to the pride flag thing? That weren't some arrests made with that? And
I believe no charges were pressed, but I think Janene would know a little bit better.
That, I believe you're right. There were no charges and I'm not aware. Keep in mind too, one of the vocal opponents on the council against the Pride celebration last year said that he hoped that there weren't going to be naked people on the floats in the Pride parade. So that's kind of the attitude
is
they
that,
were.
that Mr. Clark? Is that
That's correct. Yeah.
He kind of
when I found out that was true, I was like, well, I'm not going to write the story then. So
Yeah,
you know,
well,
Janene had to
of course
cover
not.
it.
Yeah, Josh, we're going to get to that sex therapist in just a minute.
Yeah.
But Mr. Clark sort of got out ahead of his skis a little bit. I think Tyler Hayden at the Indian interviewed him, and this is the friendliest goddamn town in America or something like that.
Yeah, it kind of goes to show you the way he speaks. And one thing that struck me is the way that he talked about, one of the drag performances that got canceled, and how he described it was a man dressed as a woman twerking in front. I was really surprised to hear him put that language out, and he's supposed to be a city leader. And
well, by the way, and he said he's lived in London, New York, that
Yes.
this is the friendliest place, but none of this would be banned in London or New York.
Exactly.
So I don't really
He
understand.
mentioned San
all
Francisco.
performance.
San Francisco.
Yeah, I got news for you. All right. Gwyn, what's the deal with this weird story about the cameras on the Hot Springs Trail or peeping at people, or who put the cameras there? How many cameras? Why are there cameras?
I know who put the cameras there. I'm not going to say.
Oh,
on
you
the
do?
show. I do.
Why, you saving
By
it
the way,
for
the
your
person who put the
column?
cameras here is a great person who does amazing things for the community. So it wasn't a hostile. I know this person. It was not a
Oh,
hostile.
wait, so it was your husband? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
no relation to me. But I do find it weird that the sheriff gave this person permission, it seems to
That
me,
was
if I
weird.
read the story, to put the cameras up. And yet the cameras said that they were put up with the permission of Public Works. So none of it really makes sense to me.
Well, that whole Hot Springs Trail, Josh, I think you had the original story about that, about the parking and who's doing what. Where does that all stand? I mean, this is a piece of that, right? Because there were people during the pandemic who allegedly were making a mess on the trail and abusing the hot springs and
Well, I mean, and there's no question that social media has really made that a destination, which, creates problems for the people who live in the neighborhood and creates problems for the ecosystem up there. So I do think there are legitimate, Josh, you could talk about it, but there are
Josh, where did we leave that? Because there was a big dispute between the county and the property owners there about, whether they could put rocks in the street that had been in the street forever and so on.
I know they took away the parking on Riven Rock Road. I believe they beefed up forest ranger enforcement out there. I don't know what the latest is. I think there's more of a ranger presence, and there is no parking, so they've made it more difficult for people to go there, because if you can't park, there's 8 spaces. You're going to have to legally park somewhere to get there. I did do the hike, by the way, and it took me about 45 minutes, and I made it to the hot springs, and all I could smell was sulfur and cannabis. I don't know why anybody would actually want to go there. It was kind of a letdown, but there were a lot of people Ryan's age there, and having fun, and nobody was local, by the way, because I was chit-chatting with them, and they were from LA and even Europe, and they had heard about
They
this.
all saw it on Instagram.
Yeah, they saw there was a viral TikTok video during the pandemic. I think Gwyn referenced that really attracted a lot of people. So as far as I know, it's still an issue, but it has calmed down a little bit.
Access to it currently because of the floods and the rains and the cleaning up of the trails. And so it's not until, they had said, I think it's the third week of March or something, but now with this new onslaught of rains, I don't know that that won't be pushed.
But just to clarify on the cameras, so there were private citizens slash ask who went to the sheriff's office and said, we want to put these cameras up so you can see if there's anything illegal going on there. Is that what happened?
It wasn't clear to me whether it was initiated by the sheriff's department or whether this person got permission from the sheriff's department. I think this person thought he had permission because the sheriff told him it was okay. That's my understanding of the story. And that was the reporting that we did. But clearly there was deception involved because there were signs on the cameras saying Public Works, and the county had nothing at all to do with this. And in fact, the person who found the cameras, they had asked that person to take the cameras down. So unclear where's this started.
What was the motive for installing them? Parking or?
No, well, I mean, I think the bulk of the cameras were up higher near the hot springs, right?
Okay.
So I think it was, you know, to make sure that nothing was happening up there that was damaging to the environment and to the, and just to track the traffic up there. But
a lot of bad behavior.
You know what? I tell you what, I'm going to have a conversation with the person who put the cameras up and find out more, and I will come back to you.
Are you going to reveal their identity?
I will ask this person if they're comfortable with that. He may be, she may be, it may be, they may be.
All right. Hey, Ryan, Gwyn noted that it's raining again.
It is.
Looking out the window is how I determine that. But there's all these trees falling. I mean, obviously the eucalyptus that fell. It's such a weird freeway. It fell across the 101 and closed it. Is there? I mean, are there more trees falling than usual, or
there is, but there's nothing surprising there. It's the moisture that we've had, and we've had a lot of rain since January. So we've had over 40 trees, and that's just city-owned trees, or on city that are blocking city property, and that's that's been about 60 days. So 2 trees every 3 days so far. Most of them have been eucalyptus, and that's, just has to do with the soil being saturated, and eucalyptus doesn't have the deepest roots. So they kind of lose that friction, and heavy winds will just kind of bring them coming down.
All right.
Eucalyptus trees, some of them, 150 feet tall, only have a 4-foot root system.
Yeah.
But they smell nice. It smells nice, especially
they're invasive species, and they're not native though.
Especially when it's a miracle that nobody got whacked with that tree.
Yeah, and especially this weekend, just be careful, and if there's any trees, don't go near them at all.
All right, Josh. So it's widely known that you're the man to go to in terms of new taco stands, donut shops, but all of a sudden today. Don't miss Josh's, of course, I'm saying this, I should say parenthetically, with the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old. Josh's column lead about sex therapists. Is this the beginning of a series on this subject, Josh? Your readers want to know.
Well, believe it or not, Jerry, it was a very uncomfortable interview. And I was very awkward, and I just sort of admitted to the sexologist, forgive me if I ask questions here that are not sophisticated. I'm just going to do my reporter thing. But Dr. Jen Kennedy, she's a sexologist. She said she's the only sex therapist in town. And she just started this group therapy session, which is virtual, which allows women to come together and talk about sexual satisfaction and ways they can satisfy themselves or express their needs to their partner. And just have kind of an honest conversation about it. And, there's different reasons why this exists. Yes, I'm talking about this, but you asked me about my story. And she said that it was, it could be medical, it could be mental, it's just age, different things people are going on in their life, different phases of the relationship. And so she's trying to fill this need and remove the taboo from the discussion. And I thought it was an interesting conversation, and she's an expert in this field. So we did it as a BizHawk. She just started it. They're in week 2 of the 6-week program, and she's definitely, kind of a superstar in this field.
Josh, isn't it a fact that you did this story as a a clear ploy to be number one on the best of Bill column next week.
Jerry, I don't even have to try to be number one. It just is that way.
Well, you
keep
hear
it
that,
great.
Janine? You hear that?
Yeah,
I'd
I
say-
heard that.
Go ahead, Gwyn. You look like you're going to say something mature. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know. I can't promise that. I just wanted to just about Josh's reporting. I watched with great interest your dressing down of elected officials about and other leaders about what journalists do and why. And I just had two comments. Because I thought a lot of your points were really good. I thought you left out one really important point. And actually, I thought you left out two really important points. Most importantly, when you said, for those of you who read other newspapers, the Independent, News Hawk, blah, 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 you never mentioned the Montecito Journal. So I just wanted to say that's the most important thing. But the other point that I thought you left out is that it's not just that journalists write about what people are thinking about and care about. It's that there is a positive correlation or a negative correlation between the amount of journalism and the amount of corruption in a town. And that's why it's so important that if we're not there to ask the hard questions and monitor what's going on, even though they would have much more fun serving if no one was looking, then that's where corruption happens. And all you have to do is look at Flint, Michigan as a perfect example of that. And I thought that was I just wanted to add that to your otherwise interesting talk.
Josh, how do you respond?
Those are great points. I did that video 15 minutes, one take, no script. And I did
Gosh,
not
that's hard
mention
to
the
believe.
Montecito Journal for no other reason other than I didn't. And I didn't want to make it all about me. So I mentioned, a couple of others, but that was
Okay,
an
I'm not defensive.
It's just not, I mean, it was not on purpose.
Well, neither
it was,
is
it was
he.
an
Yeah, neither one of you are defensive.
It was an
That's why they
oversight.
know.
And then obviously what she said about the journalism is 100% right on. I mean, yes, there's rampant corruption in Flint and in Santa Barbara and in Montecito and in Carp and in
And
Goleta.
less journalism, the more there is.
And
Absolutely.
we can't cover it all with a small team of reporters in town.
They would have never gotten away with this crap on the cannabis if there had been 60 reporters in town, as there used to be. All right, enough on that subject. Thank you all very much, Gwyn Lurie, Janene Scully of Newshawk, Josh Molina, and Ryan P. Cruz. Thank you all for watching as always, and we will see you next time on Newsmakers.